Hello, Internet. Welcome to Fireside with Peter Adkison on Gen Con TV. Yay. I am Peter Adkison. My co-host is Beverly Marshall Sailing, and our guest today is Jim Lin. Now, I promised you we would go in search of untold stories behind your favorite games, and I think we're going to find a couple today with Jim. He is as close to the origins of Magic the Gathering as you can possibly get without being Richard Garfield, really. I mean, he was one of the original East Coast playtesters. We hired him at Wizards because we were really smart, and we recognized how smart he was. And he came out to Seattle and was with Wizards throughout. Well, you outlived me. Right?
And me.
Yeah. So welcome to our show.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. All right. Well, one thing we always like to start with is sort of the prologue, if you will, or what were you doing before Magic happened? Like, we want to start with how do we transition you into the Magic story? We got to understand where Jim Lin was in, say, 1991.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny, there's that old trope that what you learn in college doesn't actually matter. It's only who you meet.
Uh-huh. Right.
And for me,
my God, yes, of course.
And for me, that was actually really true. Although in a way that would not be obvious to someone in 1987, like why my meeting Scaff Elias was so important. But in 1991, I was working full-time at General Electric, as well as being in grad school. And
General Electric, this is in Philadelphia,
This is in Philadelphia.
Or nearby.
Nearby, yeah. Technically in King of Prussia.
King of Prussia.
So,
and that really is a place.
That is a place.
It is a place.
It has
yes,
one of the
yes.
largest malls in the United States there,
we used to sell games to a game store in King of Prussia, and I always wondered. We didn't have Google Maps back then. But anyway, okay, so you were working at General Electric.
Doing what?
I was an engineer, and so...
Driving trains?
No, I was an aerospace engineer.
Okay,
so,
hey.
Yeah, so was, yeah. Another rocket scientist. Wizards of the Coast had several rocket scientists involved in the company from very early on, yeah.
And so Scaff Elias was a friend of mine from college.
Okay.
We had gone to Princeton together, and we were Dungeons and Dragons buddies and gaming buddies. And I don't remember exactly why I was at his apartment in Philadelphia when he first introduced me to Magic. It was probably either to play a computer game, probably Star Traders, or it was to plan this convention. We were running a miniatures section of this convention that in a few months, I think. So it might have been one of those, or maybe it was both.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Scaff Elias, who we think will be on our show next week. I'm not actually sure because I haven't gotten a confirmation. Scaff, if you're watching, would you email me, please? Scaff is supposed to be our guest next week. Scaff worked on Magic the Gathering and design and development, and Scaff somehow knew Richard, which we'll come to next week, maybe. Yeah. And so, yeah.
So, I'm at his apartment, and he shows me these little cards about this big, I think, and he says, hey, I've got a friend, who is making this game that I think is really cool that, I think it would be awesome for you to work on it too.
And Scaff never says anything is cool. He's incredibly critical of almost everything. So the fact that he liked it must have kind of startled you.
I wouldn't say that, I guess. That's not my experience as far as games goes.
Oh, okay.
And we played a lot of games together, and so we had a good sense of what we liked and what
Right.
we didn't like, right?
Right.
I mean, we spent a lot of our Princeton time playing various computer games, whether it was
Right.
Bard's Tale or
So he shows you Magic cards.
So he shows me these little, I think they were
playtest
1x2
the
cardboard cards,
the
if I remember right.
Yeah, the play. Actually, Lisa was on our show last week, and she brought her playtest deck of cards,
Right.
and there's a picture floating around on the internet. So, yeah, the small.
So he shows me this decks of cards, and he kind of explains this is how this game works. And so he said, would you like to be part of this group that's going to play this game together? And I said, well, this is really fun. We played one quick game, I think, with, I think we just split his deck into two parts and played it, right?
Right.
But it was, or maybe we even drawing from the same deck, I forget now. But,
Right.
And so that's how, not too long after that I met Richard.
Hold on. In that moment, though, what was your first reaction to Matt? I mean, he must have explained to you in that moment that there would be hundreds of cards and they would be the whole concept of a trading card game? Did he get into that with you? Like,
he went into the idea that it was, if I remember right, although this could be one of those things where you apply your later explanations onto.
that's fine, by the way.
Previous
That's totally
conversations.
fine in this show.
Yeah,
it's
so-
totally fine. Just, if you can't remember, just make something up. That's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
So, I think he went into, it's kind of like baseball cards where you make your own collection of things, then you build a deck and we battle our decks against each other.
Right, right.
So the basic idea was pretty interesting. I don't think we really talked at that point about, kind of the original idea that you had given Richard to kind of meet in terms of like being a game for in between sessions of Dungeons and Dragons at cons and stuff like that.
Right.
So, I thought it was just fun, right? It was like, oh, this is a really neat thing. I haven't seen something quite like this before where you get to kind of customize this thing and you could each have your own version of the game kind of. So that seemed really fun to me. So
that was your assessment of Magic the Gathering. It's fun. Okay, sorry.
That's what you worry about as a designer.
It is. I suppose that is really important. Yeah, it's fun. Good. I'm glad it was. I'm glad. Yes, good. I'm glad it was fun. So then you got pulled into playtesting then?
yeah, I mean, there was a big group of people who was essentially, we were, physically making cards, and then we had some crazy thing involving, I think, garbage bags to simulate creation of boosters, right? Where we would like cut the cards out and then shake them up in a garbage bag and reach in and grab so many.
Are you serious? Oh,
Yeah.
you see, we thought we'd have to print the final cards that way, but yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I do remember, like, I forget, and I don't think at that point the booster size had been determined. So it was like
Right.
at some point it was like, okay, you're gonna get this many of this cards and
10 cards or
it's like,
whatever,
and so it was
yeah.
like, and so
So were you guys? I'm trying to get a feel for what that life was like. I mean, like, were you getting together at the University of Pennsylvania campus in like the
I mean, mostly,
math lab
I mean,
or someplace? Like,
I mean, just
where was
in random
places?
lounges, basically where there was
Okay.
table space, right? I mean, a lot of it was in the math department just because that's where Scaff and Richard both were, but some of it was in other random places. Like I was at UPenn part-time in engineering, and so that was, so it was really just in random places. It was also in like people's apartments and stuff like that, right?
I
You know,
asked
and
this because it's like I was of course in Seattle this whole time. We're talking about this is happening in 1991 to 1992. Richard came up with the idea in the summer of 1991, is that right? Yeah, that's right.
Yes. Believe me, I remember.
It gets harder and harder, and so this was like a really important part of Magic's history that I didn't see. I never went to University of Pennsylvania. I came out. There was a big meeting that we're leading up to where I came out with Lisa and Jesper. Not
You
sure
know
if
what?
were.
I think that Doug Ferguson found a picture from that meeting. Because he showed me this picture, and I was looking at it.
Yes, yeah, there is a picture.
And I was like,
I had a picture from it, and I gave it to Richard for when he got married to Coney. I think
Oh, okay.
I brought it as a picture.
so Doug apparently found this photograph in like his old boxes in his
chalkboard?
garage. Yes. And I
Yes,
was like,
yes.
he's like, I think this is from early Watsy. And I was like, that looks like UPenn. But then I was like, but Jesper's there. And so
Yes.
I had forgotten that we had that meeting. So
Oh, I
'cause
remember
I
it
was
so
bugging me
well.
because I was like, what is this picture from? It feels like this is at UPenn,
Yes,
but
yes, it was
there's people
well.
that weren't at UPenn in this picture. So I'm like trying to struggle the place
to
where
catch,
it is.
So to catch everybody else with what we're talking about, since that's now the topic, obviously, you guys worked on the design and development of Magic for about a year, from the summer of '91 to the summer of '92, coming into the fall of 1992. We were getting up to where Magic's now going to come out in summer of '93. We're getting up to this period where we're really having to make a lot of important decisions about how Magic should be structured as a game, like the idea of a core set and expansions, and what we would name them and how they would be packaged, and whether it be a starter deck and booster packs and the rules. I mean, like all these sort of things that we take so much for granted now. And so Lisa Stevens, Jesper Meerfors, and I came out to Pennsylvania and met with, and that's the first time I met the East Coast playtesters. I had met Richard and Mike Davis before, but I had not met Chris Page you, Scaff Elias, Joel Mick, Dave Petty, and I'm not sure who all was at that meeting, just based on memory, but it was like a dozen of us, right, all sitting there, and yeah, so that meeting, but you have no memory of this meeting. But were you in the photograph?
I am in the
You're
photograph.
in the photograph. So you were there.
No, so now that you mentioned that meeting, it's like, oh right, I remember that meeting now, but I had kind of forgotten because it kind of slipped into the
Oh, there are
cracks of
many
my
other
brain,
meetings.
right?
I could start making up meetings now at this point.
but it was just one
remember?
of those things where I was like, oh, I do remember that meeting now. That's where that picture's from. Was like,
Right,
so
right.
very clearly in a classroom with a giant
There's
blackboard
big
in it, right?
green
And so
board.
it's like that.
Yeah.
That was
And
not
we have,
Wizards for
and we
sure.
have drawings
right?
up on the board about
Yes,
with like magic sets or something like that. Anyway, yeah. Okay, so so you were spending lots of time doing that sort of play testing, playing games a lot. Were you playing like on a weekly basis? Did it ever go from fun to, oh my God, this game is amazing?
I mean, so we were obviously, we were playing on a pretty regular basis. I mean, almost every weekend, sometimes during the week. And so it was, I mean, I don't know that we ever had this is amazing conversation, but it was just one of those things where obviously we were willing for fun. It was like, at the beginning, it was just like, this is this fun thing we're doing, is playing this game, right?
Right.
Just spending all this time, right? And unlike other games, there was a lot of effort in making the game happen. I mean, kind of similar to Dungeons and Dragons, right? But on everyone, right? Because we actually have to get the cards physically made whenever we wanted to make a change, right? And then do this crazy, garbage bag shaking thing to hand out cards to everyone, and
So it's amazing enough to spend that quantity of time and effort on.
So so there's all this prep work, just like playing Dungeons and Dragons. You have to do prep work, especially as a dungeon master. I would feel like we were all doing like dungeon master level preparation to participate in this game, right? And so
Cool.
Well,
fantastic. Okay, so fast forward. Obviously, Richard graduates. He moves away. You guys were some sort of amorphous unit of people who are still connected over this thing. And Richard moves to
Walla Walla.
Walla Walla, and we go ahead and publish Magic: The Gathering. Did you kind of have any? We ended up hiring you in 1994, which is a year after Magic came out. So from the time that Richard moved to Walla Walla until he eventually moved to Seattle, there's kind of like a 1 year gap there, basically. Did you have any? Were you still playing it at all with some of the other guys?
Well,
or did you kind of break up until?
So for me personally, that gap was pretty busy, just because. Not all the people were participating in this, but I don't know if you remember. You probably remember.
I do.
We kind of developed the rulebook, the original Magic rulebook, over email.
Right. Oh, good job. By the way.
Right.
Yeah.
It shows.
Right.
It does show.
shows. Right. And so, and none of us had ever written a rule book for that kind of game before. Obviously,
Well, nobody had.
Nobody in the world had.
Right.
It's not like I actually went out and tried to find other rule books that were something that was comparably complex, that I could sort of see how did they ease you into all the different levels of things you had to know, and there was nothing.
Right. And so I was actually, because I was involved in that email thing, and also there was a group of us that was trying to kind of, and I forget who was involved. It was definitely not, there was probably 15 or 20 people playing the cards. The group that was on this email thread that was, trying to make the final decisions about these are the rare cards, this is the final cost of all the cards, all that stuff. I was involved in that group via email, and so that kept me quite busy.
So that kept you quite busy, and quite
I was talking
with
you and Scaff more than I was talking with Richard at that point, in just the sort of editing of how.
Oh, the final cards, right? I think that's when we were doing our first. I won't call it templating. I'll call it proto-templating.
Yeah,
I don't think we even understood what templating was at that time.
We did not have templating down at that point.
Right. Yeah. So we're trying to do all that kind of stuff, right? And then the other thing that was going on in that period too was there was always kind of two groups of East Coast playtesters. That might have been obvious to you guys. There was kind of a group that was really centered around the math department. So it was all people that, Richard was in classes with Scaff and Dave and Chris were in that group, right?
Okay.
And then I kind of got brought into that group because I knew Scaff, right? Then the other group was a group of people that Richard played bridge with.
That would have been Joel Mick. I
So that
bet.
was Joel and
Right.
Bill and some of those
Bill
people,
Rose,
right? And so,
of course.
Oh, right,
of
Bill.
course.
and so,
God.
so we knew each other, but not that well, right? In terms of like, I was spending, I had done stuff with Scaff, and I'd met some of his math friends who were also
Right.
interested in gaming.
Right.
A little bit prior to Magic, right? When I really only met Bill and Joel and those guys through
Right.
Magic, although I did play bridge with him just because I was interested in bridge too later on. But it was one of those things where, so there were kind of two rough big groups, right?
Yeah.
And so during that gap period, also that was when some but not all of the design work on Ice Age and Mirage happened, right? And so. So I don't know if you remember, we actually called them like the Ice Age group and the Mirage group.
Yes.
Although, was it the Mirage group, or did they have some other name for
Yeah, they
themselves?
had some other name.
It wasn't
we're-
Mirage, right? It became
right.
Mirage.
It
We
became-
were Ice Age from the beginning, right?
Yeah,
And
your
so,
Ice Age. Yeah.
And so, the math group was kind of working on the card set that became Ice Age.
Right.
And then the other group was working on the cards that eventually became Mirage.
Right.
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 And so, so there was quite a
I
bit
know
of
the,
activity.
the name for that is just like right on the tip of my tongue. I know.
Yeah,
I know,
well,
I
it was
know
one of those things where I was aware of it, but I wasn't
Right,
involved
right,
really, and
right,
so I forget
exactly.
now what it was called originally.
Right.
But
Yeah.
so those groups were
Menagerie.
Menagerie. That is right.
Very good.
That's right, Menagerie.
Our
job.
technical team
Yes.
comes through.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, they're scouring on the internet, finding all the answers.
Quick, though.
Yeah.
The rulebook you were working on over email, was that the one that featured Warzel and Thomiel?
So the question here is that was the rule book that we were working on over email the one that featured who?
Warzel,
Warzel.
the example planeswalker who summoned. Yeah,
Warzel.
that had the whole story. And yes, the answer is yes.
The answer is yes. See, reference my note earlier about if we don't remember the answer, we'll just give.
No,
it.
I know that one.
Oh, really? Okay, I'm just teasing you. Okay, so you're working on the rules. So how do you think the rules turned out?
I mean, so I'm not going to defend them. They weren't very good, to be fair. But I also don't. Magic is an extremely difficult game to write rules for.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and so
It's a difficult game.
Especially
Yeah.
for when you know you're running to newbies.
Yeah.
right.
Yes.
And so it's one of those things where there's lots of things I think are apparent in it. Like, I don't think at the time we understood that we needed a much more formal kind of rules adjudication system, right? It was very by the seat of our pants. And there was probably, even after I came full-time to Wizards, I think there must have been a good 12 to 18 months where we were kind of making rulings based on how do we think this card should play. Like, the intention is for it to work like this. And we're kind of trying to Frankenstein together all these different, well, we want this card to work like this, and this card to work like this, so how can we make those things not contradict each other? And then eventually, as more cards came out, we realized, we can't just, how do we want this to work? We need to put together a much more formalized structure to make these kind of decisions. And then even the first one of those wasn't that great. And so I think it was really the second, so almost Magic 3.0, the second attempt to make a formal rule structure that really worked. I think they've tweaked it since then, but
Well, and we also had the trouble of when you're teaching people to play it for the first time, there's so many topics that you have to explain kind of all at once.
Yeah.
And in a rule book, that's like, what order do you do that in?
Right.
Whereas when you're playing, you can say, okay, we're just going to start playing, and then I will tell you how this works, and then how, now you can do that, and you can learn it as you go. But in a rule book, you can't, and that really hung us up for quite a while.
yeah.
Yes, so in terms of, you mentioned Magic 3.0 being a point where, in your view, the rules finally started to feel done in a way. I mean, they never have been done. They're always being tweaked. Help us create the context of when that happened. Do you remember, can you put a year on that?
Or a set.
I feel like that was, my memory says that was for Magic 5th edition, but I could be wrong because the editions have blurred together for me.
Right.
I mean, it was
right.
basically the first time we introduced the stack,
Yes.
and
Right.
that was kind of the first time when the cards really had a pretty clear, we can mostly decide how
Right.
cards work now. right? You know,
and that's probably around 1995 or 1996.
I think so.
Yeah,
sounds-
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is the point, 2 or 3 years after Magic was published, which of course is 2 years after Richard came up with the idea.
Right.
And so, it's looking back, it's looking like about a 5-year period from the original inception to when Magic rules really started to feel like, okay, these are the rules, and
Coherent
have
now.
reached a degree of correctness that has sustained the game since. And it just speaks to how complex the game is, and how revolutionary it was. To your point, there wasn't anything you could look at as a comparable product. Although there were some old SPI war games that maybe I should have sent your way.
Yeah.
They were complex in a very different way,
Yeah.
though, right? I mean,
Right.
like they had a very, they had a very clear, like, this is the setup, and then here are the actions you can take, and some of these actions have very complicated decision trees you have to go through to
Right.
figure out what happens. But
Yeah.
they were much more amenable to a very standard rules presentation.
Well, and their target audience was people who knew they were going to sit there for 4 or 5 hours to play this game, and that was not the brief for Magic.
And that might
Right.
just be the first session of the game.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think the other thing that is reflected too is it took us a while to get to the current model of Magic, which is, we release cards and we keep releasing more cards, and they are all supposed to kind of play together nicely in some way, right? 'Cause, I mean, originally there was some thought that, this is the first version of Magic, and then we're going to bring out the Ice Age version of Magic. And that's going to kind of replace the original version of Magic, and they don't necessarily have to play with each other. At some point, we were even talking about them having different card backs, right?
Right.
And so, like, at a certain level, the structure you have to build so that, say, 300 to 400 cards play nicely with each other, it's very different than the structure you have to build so that you can essentially
1,000.
create an unlimited number of cards and have them always play well with each other.
Right.
Right. And so I think some of those decisions kind of meant that, some of the things you would want to think about if you realize, okay, I need to build a structure that can let me make literally thousands and thousands of cards.
Right.
And we don't, and obviously when you're talking about that many cards, we can't just be talking about, well, I feel like it would be better if it works this way. Right?
Well, and also the sheer number of people who were going to be playing the game and the different things that they would want out of it. You're trying to
Right.
have a multi-audience
Right.
thing.
Okay, we got a question from.
Yeah, really quick. So when you guys said that you were, as a new thing, and you were like, oh, how should this card work? We have a question about banding specifically. Because obviously, we no longer use banding in recent Magic. So how is it supposed to work, and what was the design process behind that? Do you remember?
So the question, in case you didn't hear Kristen, is somebody's asked us about banding and how
What the heck was that supposed to be?
What is, yeah, why is it with us anymore? Like, what was wrong with banding?
So, I mean, I think the thing with banning was, the problem was it was really an idea of, that didn't really fit in the rule structure, right? And so the idea was, we want to have these guys that are extra good at teaming up. That's why it was called banding, right?
Right.
But exactly
it's kind of like
that,
stacking counters in a war game. Like,
Yeah, a little bit, right, yeah.
You have a stack of counters, and I got my infantry, my armor, and my anti-tank gun all together.
right? So, like, like when you have a banding guy, it's not just two guys who are kind of, swinging at the other guy together. It's like these guys know team moves, right?
Right.
It's like,
And for banding to
Thinking
work,
and
if I
stuff.
remember right,
Yeah.
is that both characters had to have banding. I know this is true because in Legends, one of Steve's brilliant inventions was, Steve Conard, was to come up with bands with others, which would allow a character that had banding to band with a character that didn't have banding. And I just love to mention it any chance I get, because we take one of the worst rules of Magic and make it worse.
Well, and so it ended up being this complicated rule in terms of, like, it was mostly around how like normally when in Magic, if you assign blockers, then the attacker gets to assign damage, right?
Right.
And so then the idea was, well, because these guys are really good at teaming, the defender gets to assign damage. And that,
Right.
on the blush of it, seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to do.
I thought it was great. I love banding, by the way.
But then it brings all these complicated things into play. Like, then you have to have discussions about, like, well, this is a 10/10 creature, and there's a 1/1 creature involved. Can I assign 10 damage to the 1/1 creature? So we had to make that decision.
Of course you can. That's what's awesome about it.
And then, because, this is Magic, where there's an instance and the board state changes constantly, it was like, well, what happens if all the banding guys go away, right? And so there was this kind of crazy...
Yeah.
So we kind of put together this very complicated framework of trying to make it make sense. And I think it was one of those things that it was very clunky, and it turned out to rarely be important.
Well, and
right?
that was the argument that I
Yeah.
found compelling from when R&D came and said, hey, we're going to get rid of banding, was that it's so complicated, and what are we really getting for it?
Right.
We're not getting, this is not a thing we need to keep running with, so chuck it.
It was one of the things that where Magic sort of felt more like it was being a role-playing game for 5 seconds.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, very much.
It was
I think
more
so.
about that than it was about actual mechanical
Right.
benefits.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Banding. Question answered. Okay, good. Where were we? Oh, yeah, the rule set. So it took several years, and you were very much, I'm sure, but I'll ask it as a question. I mean, you were very much involved, not just before you came out to Seattle, but throughout this period in the types of discussions that were happening in R&D about how the rules should work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool.
It's one of those things that sounds
question.
cooler than it actually was in actual experience.
No, Jim, it's really cool. I mean, it's really cool. I mean, I was I was reviewing financials and dealing with board members and HR stuff, and I always envied you and Richard Scaff and everybody for, I mean, that's, I don't know, okay, super geeky. I think that's really cool. Figuring out how to make these rules work and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so other elements of the design of Magic the Gathering. Well, first of all, let's see. So take us up to you being hired and coming out to Seattle. Like, what were the circumstances around that? Did I call you or Richard call you?
So, I mean, I think the thing that was going on was, so Magic comes out, and, there's been this group that's been working on Magic.
Right.
I think we had done some kind of freelance arrangement where, like, we were getting paid,
Right.
and we were
Right.
telling you how many hours we were working on it. And so the thing that was going on, too, was all of us were doing it on the side, right? Like, for me personally, it was really crazy because I had a full-time job.
Right.
I was going to school part-time, and then I was doing this on top of that.
Right.
And then, so I think, there was this growing frustration on both sides in terms of, I think, on the Seattle side, it was like, these guys just aren't around enough.
Well,
right?
yeah,
because it's like, and also they tend to be around on the weekends, right? And so, like, if they're responding to our emails.
Officially, that did not matter. We were around on the weekends, too.
Well, but I mean, like, it's it's one of those things where, like, you send us an email on Monday, and you probably aren't getting a response until Friday or Saturday on things that aren't really hot, right? So it's kind of can be, I think, from your side, very frustrating. Like, just like, well, they're literally not doing anything until Friday, and so there's just you're just sitting around waiting for an answer. And then, as it grew, like playtesting the Magic cards was really fun. You're just literally mostly just playing the games with each other, and then occasionally you have some discussions about these cards seem too good. These cards. And those are fun discussions to have, right? But then once you get into the guts of, right, well, how are we going to write this specific card and arguing about, do we want 6 creatures or 8 creatures in this color in this set, right? Like, it's much more like a job. I will admit it's a pretty fun job, but it's still a job at the end of the day, right? And so, at the end of the day, you're doing this kind of, in my case, a third job, on the side. And so I think it was one of those things where I think on both sides there was this kind of growing sense that this isn't
Sure,
working
sure.
out, right? You
Well,
know,
and
so-
even what you were doing, it was more than one job, even just the Wizards part, because you were trying to play test new sets and work out this rules stuff. And I know I was bugging you all the time because at that time I was doing customer service on AOL, and people were asking rules questions, and I didn't know the answers to those most of the time. So I'd be saying, "Hey Jim, hey Scaff, hey, literally anyone, tell me how this works."
So we realized this wasn't working. We brought you out to Seattle, and then you started working. So this would have been, I think, the spring of '94. I think.
Yes, I think
spring, summer '94.
we got here. It was in May of '94, and I don't remember anymore if we got here literally on Memorial Day weekend or one week before that. But it was like right around Memorial Day, because I remember the film festival was going like really soon after we got here, and it was interesting. It was a little bit of culture shock for us, just because I mean, it's not like we're all buttoned down people, that group that moved out, me, Dave, and Scaff, but I mean, I remember that summer was one of the best summers weather-wise, in my 25 years now in Seattle, right? And so we get here, and it's beautiful out. It's like one of those classic Seattle blue skies, really sunny. And we kind of show up at the building, and there's this group huddled. They're kind of huddled, like in between like a dumpster and the building, trying to hide from the sun.
I think I know what this.
And we're like, "What are you guys doing?" They're like, "Well, we're trying to hide from the sun. We hate the sun." And
That's why we live in Seattle.
and we're kind of like, "What do you mean you hate the sun?" Well, we're vampires, right?
Yeah,
And so it was all the customer service guys, right?
Yeah,
who were all
right,
like really
right.
into vampire, the
We had a lot of
game,
goths
right?
working at the company in the early days. Yes.
So we're just like, what is going on here? This is awesome, right? And like people would all, you'd always hear about how rainy Seattle was, and we're like, this is the best summer ever. But like, in Philadelphia, when it's that sunny,
Right.
it's also probably like 85 degrees with 85% humidity.
Right,
So it's
right,
miserable to be
right,
outside.
right.
Whereas in Seattle, you're like, it's awesome to be outside when it's like sunny and nice, right? And so.
But eventually you fit in. Eventually you brought up the ratio of non-goths to goths, and eventually things prevailed. So you continued to work on the rules, and also you mentioned Ice Age and alliances. So now, getting into the structure of what your job was like at Wizard of the Coast, we always had this distinction between design and development.
Actually, we didn't always have that.
Oh.
I mean, that was something that happened a little bit later, I think.
Okay.
Because I think when we first came out, that was all kind of done as one mushy thing, right? I mean, and then...
Okay, well, it was all one department, but the ideas of this...
I mean, I think that really didn't get really formalized until we worked on Legends and Homelands, right?
Okay.
Because like if you look at what happened with Ice Age, essentially, I mean, like the same group of people designed it and developed it, right?
Sure,
Which
sure.
I think now looking back on it from a pure what would you want to do point of view is probably not quite right, But then you have a group that is kind of responsible for finishing the cards that's a little too attached to, I meant this card to do this, not this other thing you're trying to make it do for it to work
Right.
better in the game, right? So it wasn't really until, the company had us work on, Steve's set and the Homelands group set,
Legends.
where it was kind of like, right, here's a group of designers and here's a,
Right.
and so we're going to have the people who know the game better do the development. I mean,
Right.
and even then, I think that was still really at a proto idea of design versus development, and was still very, a little fuzzy, like how much you're supposed to respect a design intent versus just do what you think is best. And
Right.
I mean, I think Wizards is much more formalized about this these days, and they also make a lot more effort to do things like, for sure the design leader will be not the same as the development leader, but on the development team there will be at least one member of the design team to kind of be
Okay.
there to represent the design
Right.
intent and to not just destroy that in the development process, and so.
so realizing that it was a little fuzzy in the beginning, and it took a while before we kind of separated out the two functions. There's still this sense that there were some card sets that you worked on as a designer, and other sets you worked on as a developer.
Right.
Is that right? And
Yeah.
so, which sets were you involved? I think it was Ice Age and Alliances, and
So as a designer, like so the kind of the Ice Age design group did, which was me, Scaff, Dave Petty, and Chris Page. We did Antiquities, Ice Age,
yes, Antiquities,
uh,
right?
Fallen Empires, and Alliances.
Okay.
And then we were also heavily involved in helping Richard finish some of the sets that he designed. So like Alpha, what is the final card list and what is the final
Right.
wording and stuff like that. Arabian Nights, and then so I worked on Magic through the end of Alliances, right? And so all those sets I did either design or development or both on them, right? And so all the ones I designed, we also, like I said, we hadn't really gotten this idea that maybe you should have a different group developing
Right.
and designing. I mean, part of it was we only had 3 people working full time from
Sure,
a game design point of
sure.
view at that point, right? And so,
Right.
so all those sets I
So development would have included Arabian Nights, Legends, Homelands, The Dark,
right?
and maybe Weatherlight or something. I don't know, depending on how.
No,
far
I mean
that-
I
That
think
was
that's
later.
it in terms. That was later, right?
yeah, I was trying to jump past Ice Age.
Yeah. Well, so
Fall-
after
yeah.
Alliances, then like we actually were bringing more people on, and we actually did a split, right? And so we had the group that worked on Magic, and then we had the group that worked on other TCGs because we were trying to follow up Magic with other TCGs, right? And so I moved over. I guess this was. I feel like this must have been early '96. It might have been late '95, though. I moved over to work on all the other trading card games, right? And so then I was leading efforts on Netrunner, BattleTech,
Right,
VTAS,
right.
all those other
Right.
all those other games
Vampire
we were doing,
Defense
right?
Level.
Yeah.
And so, and then then later on, I kind of got Magic back when I took over all of the R&D efforts and stuff like that. But in terms of working at a detailed level on individual card sets,
Right.
Alliances was my last set for doing
Right.
that. So.
So we promised our users, our viewers, some stories. Any stories that you can recall about?
Say mana symbols.
Say mana symbols. I seem to remember there was something interesting about mana symbols that happened.
Well, so it's funny. Mana symbols was one of the things that I look back on and I think we got wrong with Magic.
Wrong.
Yes.
No, you
and-
got nothing wrong with Magic.
And also, I mean, I don't know that the other competing system we were talking about at the time was right either, but I do think there's some clear negatives about what we ended up doing with Magic. And unfortunately, the rest of the industry has basically adopted Magic-style symbols, which I think does
Okay.
this weird thing. And so
All right, do
So-
tell.
so
I
kind
have
of the
no
history
idea
of
where
that
you're
is
going on this. So-
when Magic, if you look at the early Magic playtest cards, the way
Right.
they're done is there is a big number, and then there are some letters next to
Right,
that big number
right.
that are smaller, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea was the big number was how much total mana it cost, right?
Oh,
I mean, so
okay, that's different
So
than
for
how it
example,
ended up.
Lightning Bolt would have had a big 1 next to it, right?
Okay.
And then
And then a
if
red
there were
mana.
any specific symbols that you needed to have, like, and at the time we didn't have the ability to essentially create nice symbols, so we were just using letters.
Right, right.
So R was for fire, for red energy,
Right.
and so that's what the early playset cards were done.
Right.
And then when it came time to put that on a card in a much nicer thing where it's not just a big letter with a big thing, we talked about that system, and then we also talked about the system that ended up being adopted, which was Lightning Bolt is just written as R essentially now, just the red
Right,
mana
right.
symbol, and then a card that say costs 3 total mana, one of which must be red, would be written as 2
Two
in
and
a
an R.
circle, which is like the 2 colorless symbol.
Two
and then
colorless,
R, right?
to any color, right? Yeah, yeah, an R.
And so I think the problem that this has created, though, is that 2 colorless symbol means 2 completely opposite things. So from the purposes of paying for a card, that 2 colors means it's the most wild possible, right? Any type of mana can be used for that.
Right.
But then when the purposes of generating mana, the 2 colors is the least wild possible. It can only be used to satisfy that color
Right.
symbol, right? You know, I mean, so I really think, I don't know that the big number made sense, but I really think it probably should have been 1 extra symbol, which is like, you know, 2 with some kind of different symbol that indicates this is any color mana can survive it. So maybe it's some kind of rainbow symbol or, you know, something like that, indicating that any color of mana can satisfy those requirements.
Right.
And then, you know, you still have a color symbol to generate mana that is only used for satisfying that, right? And so you get this weird thing of right now, I think it makes it really hard for beginners to understand the mana system because this one symbol literally means 2 completely opposite things, and it's very confusing to kind of figure that out.
Right.
And it also means...
I have to admit, I'm confused now.
It also means that, you know, that paying for costs isn't quite as simple as symbol matching either, right? Like, you know, where you can generate this thing, and so... So, you know, so that's one of the things I feel like we did get wrong, and then almost all other games have adopted similar systems where the colors mana symbol or whatever their equivalent is means the same thing.
Right,
You know,
right,
both
right.
most wild and least wild at the
Right.
same time.
Okay,
So
so
it's
I'm gonna. Okay, yeah, I see. That's interesting. That's so weird. I never heard about that. That was like one of those arguments or discussions that R&D kept within itself. Like, don't tell Peter; he'll weigh in on it, and then we'll end up with an even worse idea.
I feel like for sure, like Jesper was part of that discussion. Because, I mean, it was impacting how we design the cards, and I kind of I think that Beverly must have been part of that discussion too, but maybe I remember wrong. So, I mean.
Well, we lost Beverly for a moment, so we could make up what Beverly's answer was.
But I mean, I didn't, and you know, it's funny because I feel like half the reason we ended up choosing the system we did was to support X spells, you know, like Fireball.
Oh, right, right.
Because then those cards didn't have to say X+1 on them; they could just say X.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Which is kind of a really
Well, you know, I
bad
gotta
basis
say,
for
Jim,
making that decision.
I gotta say, Jim, this really isn't that big of a problem.
I mean,
I mean, you're saying this in kind of some sort of like academic, if I could say that without being insulting, like, really,
Well,
it worked
reason
out.
It sticks out to me as an error is, you know, since Magic has been created, you know, I've taught literally hundreds of people how to play Magic or games similar to Magic,
Right,
similar
right.
mana systems,
Right.
and that is always a sticking point, getting them to understand how those symbols work. So
Right.
it's one of those things where I feel like at a certain level, Magic has just permanently slightly handicapped itself in terms of letting people understand how the game works.
See, now I would have expected like the timing rules to have been the
So I mean, the reason I focus on this is, like, the time rules at a certain level don't matter to beginners, because you read the cards, you try to figure out what they do, right? You know, and
right.
it takes you a while to get into interactions where you suddenly discover that I really need to understand the timing system to understand what happens here.
Right.
So in
Right.
almost all applications, it's you just read the card, you follow what it does. It's very clear what happens, right?
I remember why I hired you. You're really smart.
You know, mana symbols, you know, that is one of your very first, most basic things. And so the fact that, and you know, like, and whenever I've done games that use these similar systems, it's always the same thing. You're like, oh, damn it, we got to explain to people how this works again. You know?
So I don't know. Since we have you here with Beverly and representing game design and development and editing, you know, in my imagination there were epic fights between game design and editing. Like, please tell me that's true. Like, and tell me a story about.
I mean, there was definitely some disagreements. I mean, you know, I think a lot of them centered around the templating process, right? You know, especially as we tried to move Magic text towards what I would call a technical language.
Yeah.
Where, like, if you become an expert in that language, you have a very good idea of what the cards are telling you they
And
do.
Darla was very involved in that. She was on our show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and talked some
But
about
we even
templating.
we had this kind of stuff even before Darla came along. Where
Right,
there was a lot
right.
of pushback from me in the beginning on, okay, this I understand that this has to mechanically work this way and you have to be super, super specific about it, but it also has to look friendly.
Right, and so there's that balance of, I think, as game designers, artists, you tend to be, we don't care if that's proper English or not. We want to treat it as a technical language where it doesn't matter if it's proper English.
Right.
But looking back on it, I mean, I think I appreciate let's try to make it actually read like English as much as possible
Right.
so that, it does not come off as complete gobbledygook to someone who doesn't know how to play, right? So
Right,
you're trying to
right.
balance.
You want to make it
between those two things.
approachable.
Right, yeah.
And you want to
So-
make it so that people can apply their intuition as well as their sort of math knowledge to
Yes.
figure out what it is you're trying to type.
Okay, but did you ever try and slip something by editing?
Well, so then the other big area I would say that there was a lot of disputes over was card naming. So
Card
early
naming.
Magic card naming was kind of the wild, wild west. I mean, people
Yeah.
were putting all kinds of crazy shout outs to themselves, their friends, their, whatever, and their, and so-
JMD tome.
Right.
Right.
And so, I mean,
J.
For
Michael
J.
Davis.
Michael Davis, yeah.
Yes.
right. If you find an old Magic card that has a very odd sounding turn on it, it's probably some crazy shout out to someone, right? I mean, and these range from the very obvious, like Sentinel Druid is just lunatic backwards, right? Leshrac is an anagram of Charles, who's one of my college roommates. So
Neveringall's Disc is a nod to
Larry Niven, right? Yeah. And so,
yes, yeah.
and so, eventually Wizards got very disciplined about naming cards and
Well, when we started realizing it was going to be an intellectual property
Right.
and not just this is just some guy's name we're going to throw on this card. It's going to actually be
Right.
a character you have to worry about.
and trying to create a world. And then there was the transition period where we were going from, you can kind of name the cards whatever you want, and editing's really only trying to say, no one can read that name. Come on, guys.
No one
right?
can pronounce that name.
Right, yeah.
Therefore, no one can talk about this card.
Right, that just sounds really stupid, guys. Come on, I know it's your stupid anagram, right? But
The rule was if we could tell it was a shout out and it didn't sound even remotely like it could be anything else, then we would push back.
so there was this period where before it kind of, eventually Wizards made a naming team that named all the cards, and then the designers were told, don't even put real card names on your cards, right? And so that resulted in us as a joke, because we kind of didn't like this. It was kind of like taking our power away, right? And so when we submitted alliances, every card was named after a monkey or an ape. So it was like, this is Grape Ape. This is, and then the one of them was Chris Page named one of the cards Monkey. Stop it.
Because that fits.
So in between, there was kind of an active effort to get our stuff through, right? And then there's a couple ones that I remember that are pretty funny. One of them was the Order of Lightbearer, which we submitted the card list with it spelled, I think, Leitbyrr, because we were trying to make it look appropriate. Is that Scottish or Irish? I'm not sure now. But anyway.
That was one of the problems with it, by the way.
Not that we even knew. We were just faking it, right? 'Cause we were just trying to make it look right. And then whoever was involved, I think it was Darla, but it might have been someone else, was like, oh, come on, guys. You can't make it the Order of Lightbearer.
Yes.
And we're like, haha, Lightbearer, that's really funny. And we're like, no, it's really Lightbearer. And we were just trying to spell what we thought that would be spelled like in that language. And like, oh, well, if you want it to be Lightbearer, that sounds perfectly normal. It can be, Leitbur. And so then, I think this was after I moved off of Magic. I think this was when we were working on Network, and I was talking to Bob Kruger about, we got one patch, you guys, on that one. He's like,
Bob
what do you
Kruger
mean?
being an editor who was not on Magic but was
Right.
on the other TCG
And
show.
so I will try to recreate that moment live with you two.
Right.
So the Order of Lightbearer, they are followers of Lightbearer. So what
Yes.
would you call the follower of Lightbearer?
Hintbur?
Librarian.
Oh, God.
So Lightbearer would be
Yeah.
one option, but
Yeah.
another option might be
Light bearer? Light bearer. Anybody typing it from the audience? Come on. Where's the internet when you need them?
Lightburists.
Lightsabers?
maybe, like you could call someone a Trumpite. So what would that be
Light
for?
bearerite?
Light bright?
Light bright?
Yes.
Oh,
Light
okay.
bright.
That was our little joke. Was they were the Liperites. So.
Light brights. Okay.
So that was.
Okay.
So, and Bob's response was to curse me out, in a very humorful way.
Okay,
So it
good.
was like,
We have a story of.
Yeah, so-
Do you have a retort to this
If
tale
you-
of victory and getting
No,
something
it's
past?
fine. If you make it something that's that hard to get, then
Then more
you
power.
can totally put it. You can, as long as it's not, a
Yeah,
crude
well-
joke or something. But
Yeah, on that time, yeah. Steve Conner was on our first show, and he
Yeah.
told the story about he tried to do a shout out for one of my old D&D characters that he loved, named Alcor, who was a wizard. So he had a card called Alcor's Tome, but of course, he spelled it wrong and ended up being published as Alcor's Tomb.
Which is kind of the opposite shout out he was probably trying to do, right?
Yeah, it's like, it really turned it out to be a very backhanded sort of shout out, right? Tomb, tomb, I know, what's different?
So then another funny naming one,
Yeah.
which is pretty famous, is, we thought it was very funny that the company was very focused on emphasizing the fact that Richard had a PhD.
yeah.
So I don't know if you
Yeah.
remember, for a long time,
Yeah.
all of his credits was Richard Garfield, PhD.
All right, and then that came from me to some extent. I was very much. I thought it was very cool.
So we decided we were going to make a card named after, which was an anagram of Garfield, PhD, which is Feldegriff. And the way we got that passed was, I think the editors were like, "What the hell is a Feldegriff?" And we said, "It's a purple flying hippo." And they're like, "What? It's a purple flying hippo. Come on, guys." And I think Amy Weber was walking by, or was something. She was like, "I could make an awesome purple flying hippo. You guys should totally do that card." and so she drew a purple flying hippo. And we're like, "Okay, it's a purple flying hippo, Feldegriff."
Right.
So we got Feldegriff through. So.
Nice. Oh my God, that's fantastic. Do we have any more questions from the interwebs? No. Nope. All right.
Didn't we end
Yeah.
up putting two
Yeah, you have a
Fs
question?
on it though?
Yeah.
Hey,
Okay.
Jim, you mentioned the formatting on the tops of the mana symbols themselves. Are you familiar with energies and waste symbols as well too? Some of the newer.
Only a little bit.
Or a little
So
bit,
yeah.
But how do you feel about their introduction to the game? Do you feel like that's a good change or a bad change necessarily, especially with the problems that you already just talked about? You know what I mean?
Am I supposed to restate that question because I'm not quite sure what it was? Something about.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I think.
So he's asking about the incorporation of
New resources.
new resources.
Right. I mean, I think that's fine. I mean, I at some point I always felt like that was going to happen to keep making new Magic cards, right? I mean, for the longest time, people kept talking about, will we ever do a 6-color of Magic, right?
Right.
And I
Right.
think
That was
like the one that, we're going to do purple Magic eventually, or purple
right,
pink or whatever.
right.
Right?
Orange
I'm
Magic.
still waiting for that.
So,
yeah.
I think they've decided that should never happen, but I mean, I don't know. But,
Well, yeah. I mean, it conflicts with the design of the card back for one thing, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons you kind of don't want to do it, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so.
So okay. So you think it's good? I mean, yeah, the game has to keep evolving, right?
Right, yeah.
I've always thought that the all the different formats for how you play are where a lot of that interest gets satisfied. In terms of variety to the game. The commander format, one-headed, how many-handed giant, two-headed giant. The different types of drafts.
Well, and multiplayer when we were,
the
getting
Grand
people to do it at the
Melee.
beginning, yeah.
But I think you still have to keep introducing new mechanical concepts because otherwise the game gets boring. And the thing is, eventually you probably need to introduce new resources or other symbols on the cards to support those concepts because otherwise the cards just get longer and longer. It's like if you aren't willing to do that, you get this thing of like, okay, well, we've done all the simple things you can do with this, so now we're going to do more and more complicated versions of that, or we're going to avoid introducing a new symbol or resource type, we're going to have to write around that, which means you're going to kind of have to explain that on every card. And so, I mean, I think it's just one of those natural things. Like, if you want to keep making card sets for 20 years, and you're going
Right.
to keep introducing these new things.
So that's a good question. We're getting a little close on into time, but I think this is a good one. That in the early days of Magic, there was a fear that we were going to run out of ideas for cards. And I remember having conversations. I don't remember exactly with who. Certainly, Scaff was almost always in these conversations, and you. Then at some point, there was like, oh no, we're not worried about that. We got enough ideas. We're never going to run out of ideas for Magic cards. looking back now, I mean, what's your thinking now, though? Like, I mean, you're not responsible for it anymore. You don't work at Wizards anymore. How do you feel about the long-term legitimacy of Magic: The Gathering, and the ability to keep coming out with new cards and keeping it fresh year after year after year after year?
So I mean, I think it's pretty much clearly demonstrated that you can't keep doing new cards. I think the discussions you're talking about, some of it was about whether or not to reprint existing cards. And I think that was a decision that was made that was correct and that was important, was you can keep coming out with new Magic cards, right? And you can even keep coming out with new Magic cards that don't have to be, 2 paragraphs for every single card. But you can't keep coming out with really simple, really short, really beginner friendly, like, if you are just learning how to play the game, you can look at that card and know immediately what it does. Those are the cards you
Grizzly
cannot
Bears.
keep coming out with, right? And so
Yeah.
I think the decision to say we are willing to just reprint that card, and not rename it every time to make it a new card, but instead to keep it,
Right.
we want there to be a simple card that does that thing, and we'll just keep reprinting that card if we have to, to keep it so that there is always a relatively simple set of Magic you could get as a beginner to play as an important one that was correctly made. But I'm not really worried about, the ability to keep making more and more card sets. More and more concepts will get introduced, and Wizards actually does bring old concepts back too. Where
Sure. Eventually, you get to recycle old ones because it's been so long nobody remembers.
or the people who do think it's cool to see it come back,
Sure.
right?
Right. Yeah.
Like if you've spent
Yeah.
3 years
Yeah.
playing a mechanic and you don't want to see it,
Flanking.
like you might be tired of that mechanic, but then now it's been 5 years, you're like, oh, I remember that mechanic was cool. It's really cool to see it back, right?
Exactly.
And so that managing of, okay, it's time to bring this one back because people miss it and it hasn't been so close as
The whole new generation of Magic players have never seen
Right,
it. So
yeah,
it's new to them,
exactly.
And it's
Or
nostalgic
just it works
for-
really
yeah.
well with another mechanic that we want to do.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sitting there trying to remember. You started to tell us a story right before we came on, and now I can't remember the setup question for it. That's a little behind the curtains. How
This
things
is
really
just a
work.
funny story I have about,
Go.
fun stories that happen at Wizards early
Yeah.
on, right? And so Chris Page, who he never came out to work for Wizards full time,
Right,
but he was
right.
part of the Ice Age design team.
Right.
He had this habit of sending out, this actually even started before Magic was published, these April Fool's emails to people, right? And so one year he sent out this crazy card list he said that we were working on, and it had things like, if you launder this card, and then it would do certain things better and stuff like that, right?
Launder. You mean like run
Like you had to run it through the laundry to
laundry.
get its full effect, right? So, and so in 1995, his April Fool's email message was, he sent out this kind of realistic thing saying, I heard this story. I forget where he said he heard it, whether he read it in a newspaper or it was on NPR, but I heard a story that Congress is about to ban Magic because it's satanic. And at that time, Mike Ryan, who had just, I think he was 1 or 2 weeks since he had moved his whole life from Indiana to Seattle to work on Magic for Wizards of the Coast.
as an editor,
As an
As an
editor.
editor, yeah.
working for Beverly.
Still a very
editor.
good friend of mine.
Yeah. Yes.
And he freaks out. He is just like, oh my God, I just moved my whole life out here and I'm going to lose my job as we're going to get shut down. And he is wandering around the company talking to people about what are we going to do? And just because most people knew there had been this tradition, that was probably the third
People
one
who
Chris
weren't
had sent out.
newbies, yeah.
Right, and
Right.
and everyone just plays along, well, there's no coordination at all. It was just
Yeah.
people are like, yeah, I know that does sound really bad. I hope that's not true, but I don't know what do you think we can do about it, right?
Maybe we can find you a job on the vampire game.
Right, and it just, I think it took Mike something like 36 hours to find out that it was a joke. And so, and there was literally zero coordination of any kind about let's keep pulling
Now
this leg. It
everybody
was
please
just-
tell this to Mike. Yeah.
Right, it was just, everyone knew it
that's-
was a joke and they thought it was really funny that this poor noob didn't realize it was a joke and was
We had a lot of fun in those days, didn't we?
yeah.
New employees had a tendency to get baptized by fire, yeah.
Yeah, we did a lot of crazy things back then. Do you remember Cerebus Day?
Yes.
Oh,
That was
I
the
forgot
best.
about Service Day.
Especially when it was also board meeting day.
That's right.
Yes.
It was on a board meeting.
Cerebus Day.
Yes.
This might push us over by a minute. We got to tell the Cerebus Day. You go ahead. You tell the Cerebus Day.
So, this comic is not that well known anymore, probably because it's old, and it got really weird and kind of questionable later on in its life cycle. But at the time,
like many of us.
a lot of us were reading this comic book called Cerebus, which was a crazy Conan the Barbarian spoof at its beginning, featuring an aardvark, right? who was like Conan the Barbarian as an aardvark, and he always talked to him about himself in the third person. Like he would never say I. He would say things like, Cerebus thinks we should go and kill those, evil monsters or whatever, right? And so at one point we decided we were going to have a Cerebus Day where everyone in the office had to talk about themselves in the third person.
Yeah. And if you didn't, I will finish the story for you because it's a great story. If you messed up, you had to stop and oink like a pig, right? And so say, hey, how are you doing? Oops. How's Beverly doing? And so Richard came in one day and he announced it was Cerebus Day to the whole company, explained it on email, and told everybody that this was the game, this is what you had to do for a day, and if you screwed up, you had to oink like a pig. I don't know if he planned it this way. He swears he didn't, but Richard's too smart. We had a board meeting that evening, and it was we had a board meeting that evening, and of course we couldn't ignore Richard's on the board. Richard's the largest shareholder. We were all,
and Richard would make you oink like a pig.
And Richard, it wasn't a traditional company where there were really powerful venture capitalists backing the company. I mean, it was kind of an inside board, really, and most of the stockholding were people that on the board, also people that owned all the stock and worked at the company, right? And so everybody kind of came in, and so at the board meeting, we're having to talk this way. And the funny part was that we had a visitor that day. We had a senior accountant from the Seattle offices of KPMG, Pete Marwick, and it was the week where they were going to report on the audit of the company. And so, so this guy gets up there and he goes, "Hello, I am." Oops. Here to talk about the audit. And it was hilarious. All right. Any parting words, Jim? We're out of time. I mean, thank you. Thank you for being honest. So I think we could have gotten more stories. Maybe we'll have to have you out again. Okay. Well, this is all we have for today. Yes, thank you very much. That was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you coming on the show. And thank you for joining us here on Fireside with Peter Adkison on Gen Con TV. I want to thank my co-host, Beverly Marshall Sailing, our guest, Jim Lynn, and also want to thank Gen Con TV for having us on the show, Chaldea for providing this film studio for us to record in, and I hope you'll come back next week. We think that our guest next week will be Scaphalias, but he hasn't responded to my confirming email, so stay tuned on that particular point. We will be here next week, one way or the other. And between now and then, while you're waiting for us to come back, be sure and check out Table Takes here on Gen Con TV on Fridays at 11 a.m. and also The Brothers Murph here on Gen Con TV, which is on Mondays at 5 p.m. I almost got through that without looking at my notes. All right. All right, that's it. Thanks for coming.